I got into writing when I was in second grade and wanted to start my own version of the student newspaper. And they wouldn't let me. But it was a lot of fun to try, and I've always wanted more story. I've always wanted, to solve the mysteries. Like, if you remember Encyclopedia Brown back in the day, where you have this story and your job is to solve, as a reader, is to solve a mystery. So I love that component. When I was 9 years old, I accidentally amputated my right little toe. And for an entire summer, I was basically laid up on crutches or in the hospital, relearning how to walk. And I discovered the Hardy Boys. And I checked out Hardy Boys books by the pound at the Enterprise Public Library. I'm originally from Southeast Alabama. So going into all of the Hardy Boys books and getting more and more story. They were good because it's such a long series, and then I graduated to reading more adult authors, and I always wanted the chance to sit down and write my own stories. My parents really encouraged me to read and encouraged my creativity. There were always books around my house. No book was ever off limits, no matter what it was. I came home as a 12-year-old with a copy of Night Shift by Stephen King, which is a book of short stories, and they're all incredibly scary, especially for a 12-year-old. My parents didn't care. They were happy that I was reading. The first adult novel I can tell you that I read was The Iron Marshal by Louis L'Amour. I read it when I was 12 years old, and that started me on the 120-something novels that Louis L'Amour wrote. They were pulp novels, essentially, but they sort of developed my taste, and from there I sprang forward into like Stephen King and Robert B. Parker and Donald Westlake and Lawrence Block and Elmore Leonard, all of these guys who were just phenomenal authors and doing kind of interesting riffs on crime and mystery, where, one of the great things about a crime novel is that it is still one of the underdog stories in America. We are so kind of homogenized and everything is large corporations and, that people work for. And for a crime novel, it's one guy, maybe five guys who are bucking the system, trying to get what they want. And they're working very hard, and maybe harder than they would at a regular job, right, to get what they want. And I think there's something in fiction to cheer for there. Both of my parents have passed in the last 15 months. They passed essentially 14 months apart from one another. They were the people who went out and found me an old typewriter, My mom especially was incredibly supportive of me writing. My dad was supportive of me writing as well. One of the big things that I really love is that I kind of had my breakthrough with my first book, which is Living the Gimmick, the year before my mom passed. So my mom got to see, she passed away in November of 2022. She got to see Living the Gimmick come to fruition and got to see the really stellar response that it got. My dad was kind of a little bit different, and it was almost a little bit more partnerish, because we would find books for one another. And, hey, have you read this? Or, hey, have you read this? And my dad got to see Living the Gimmick come out, and he got to see Magic City Blues come out. And the way that my dad is, I gave him a copy of Living the Gimmick, which is dedicated to him. And he read it in a day and called me and said, I want you to know this is better than a lot of books I've paid for. That's how my dad was. The really cool thing for me, a good memory that I'll always have of my dad, is that he started reading my current work in progress the night before he kind of started going downhill. He closed the book, the manuscript, and he said, these people are crazy. But it was like the last thing that he really did was start reading my manuscript, and I really wish he had finished it. It's hard to think about the fact that whatever I publish from now on, he won't have read. Living the Gimmick is essentially what happens if the most famous professional wrestler on the planet is murdered in a very public fashion, and his best friend has to navigate the world of sports entertainment to find the killer. Imagine if Ric Flair, for instance, were shot and killed in downtown Birmingham, because the book is set at the Boutwell Auditorium in Birmingham. So it's kind of a fair mystery. All of the clues to solve the murder are on the page, all right? And it's up to you to put it together and try to figure it out before I reveal who the killer is. So in some ways, it's the best of both worlds, because I get to play with all of these huge personalities in the pro wrestling world, right? All of this outlandish stuff. But it's also a very traditional book in that it follows, playing fair with the reader, giving you the clues, having a fun element of you trying to figure out who did it. Magic City Blues, my second book, is a lot different. From the beginning, you probably have an inkling of who's going to end up being the bad guy. But Magic City Blues, for me, combines a couple of things. Number one, I love the Birmingham metro area. Bluff Park plays a part in the book. You will see the narrator drive through Bluff Park and comment on it on his way to dispose of a gun that he has used to commit a couple of felonies. But for Magic City Blues, it's just a trip through Birmingham. It is built on the idea of uncovering a land swindle involving the Caraway Hospital property. And it's also kind of a love letter to two of my literary heroes, a guy named Donald Westlake, who I think is the best genre writer of the 20th century, and a guy named Robert B. Parker, who wrote the Spencer novels. They are a lot of fun. They are, to me, books that are showcasing the evolving South. Specifically, Magic City Blues is doing that. One of the things that people who introduce me when I do speaking events and whatnot, they say Bobby Mathews is the author who writes about the bloody and black heart of the modern South, okay? And the South is changing so much. And there are people whose voices are louder and bigger now than they have ever been, and that's a good thing in the South. Whether you're talking about LGBTQ voices or BIPOC voices, everybody has a place in the South. Those voices are important, and it's important to me as a writer to not just showcase the middle-aged white guy's point of view. It's important to acknowledge and be receptive to other people and characters as well. Negative Tilt is a book of short stories. There are 28 stories in there, from literary and general fiction stories. Negative Tilt is the story that won the 2023 Derringer Award for Best Long Story from the Short Fiction Mystery Society. The Alabama Media Group named Living the Gimmick the Best Novel of 2022. The story in Negative Tilt, called Ghost of Buxahatchee Creek, it won the Alabama Media Group Best Short Story Award, and then was honored by the National Federation of Press Women. My stories have appeared in anthologies nominated for an Anthony Award from the World Mystery Convention. So I'm really fortunate, Negative Tilt, for me, is kind of the culmination of something that I really wanted from when I was a child. Because I started with the Encyclopedia Brown stories, right? We come full circle. So, because those are all short stories, and then to have a short story collection like this is really kind of cool to look back and say, all right, Donald J. Sobel wrote the Encyclopedia Brown stories and books. Stephen King's Night Shift was an important building block in my development as a reader and a writer. Louis L'Amour's War Party was an important building block in my education as a writer and as a reader. So I've always had a love for short stories. They're kind of like a quick kiss in the dark from somebody that you caught a glance with at a party, and nothing will ever happen, except in that moment. In that moment where that moment is there and it's gone. And that's it. That's what I love about the short story. It has that kind of romance to it. So my favorite story in there is probably Negative Tilt, because I think it is me writing at the highest level that I can write right now. My second favorite story is probably the Swahili word for hope, which is about a white graduate student who steals a story from an international student who has a different take that he's ever seen before, and he's so desperate to be, the white grad student is so desperate to be published and to be seen as successful that he takes this kid's story. And that's kind of a different kind of crime story. That is a story of theft in the very, very staid world of academia, and it's kind of fun to play in that. The story that I really love that hasn't been published yet is My Father's Guns, which is a really hard story to have in there right now. 3 weeks before my father passed, my brother actually passed, completely unexpectedly. And so if you read My Father's Guns as, with the main character being me, which he's not, but he's close enough that you could blow him a kiss, right? You will see that these two characters are kind of hard to read, especially if you know me. And like right now, I couldn't go back and read it because it involves the death of a patriarchal character and what happens in the aftermath with the things that are considered inheritance by his kids. And all of that is fiction, with the exception of one thing. There is a table in that story, all right? Family dining table. That table was at some point broken, and my dad, being the carpenter that he was, took the shattered pieces and pulled them back together and made something beautiful and whole out of something that had been shattered. I kind of give an homage to that table because it plays a central role in what happens in that story.